We've pushed it live. Let me go pull up the document here real quick because we haven't actually... Oops, I haven't pushed that live to Facebook yet. For some reason, Facebook's not been wanting to let me post recently. I gotta figure out what's going up with that. Catch of the day, Google Docs. Dun, 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 dun. What topic did we want today? We have... I'm just going to sound some stuff. I don't know if you're on the document or not, but I'm just going to sound some stuff off.
Yeah.
We get physical tabletop versus virtual tabletop, favorite settings in tabletop, favorite crafting systems in MMORPGs or RPGs, or which ones didn't work, death penalties in MMOs versus RPGs versus tabletop. Is group-based gameplay really that challenging? And looking at tabletop versus co-op versus MMOs, voiced or not voiced games, cutscenes or no cutscenes. What's that?
Kind of like the one is group content that challenging. That's
Okay, this is a great topic because
Yeah.
when I was doing Saga Lascivia stuff, I always used to go back and I always would challenge people. Anytime someone would say group-based gameplay is challenging, I would say, well, do you say the same thing about Monopoly? Because Monopoly is group-based gameplay. Would you define Monopoly as challenging? What about tabletop when you're sitting around the couch with 6 of your friends and you're playing Dungeons and Dragons? Is that challenging? Why is it that MMORPGs get singled out as the group-based content being considered hardcore or, something that is somehow inherently more difficult than solo play? Love your thoughts on that. Go.
So we're not talking about PvP, first of all.
Nope.
That's different. We're talking about PvE, group-based content, raids, dungeons, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And here's what I'll say. It can be, but it's not because you're grouping. It's because the content was created assuming that you have a good group that everybody knows their role. Then it can be, right? And it's really just, I feel like it's not always. Most of the time it's not until you get to things where you've got to learn something that the developer has made, right? Usually the only difficulty I would say would come from people not knowing how to do whatever it is they're doing that day. And so somebody has to help them, or they have to figure it out if there's nobody there that understands the intricacies. But usually, in most MMOs, especially in modern day, I don't think it usually is. I think it's usually fairly easy up until in-game. You know what I mean? Like, you do your damage, even if you suck at it, most of the time in a normal group-based situation, nobody will know anyway, unless you're running parsers. And it is what it is. And, like, typically they give you more than enough ammunition. Like, you only need, like, 60% of the full power of your group to do the content laid before you.
I think one of the things I've always come back to is that it's not the content that makes group-based gameplay challenging. It's the interpersonal dynamics and relationships and the needing to manage people component that is the challenging component. Because if you're in a D&D scenario, well, let's start with Monopoly. You're playing a game of Monopoly. Everybody has the horror story of, like, somebody gets pissed. If you've played Monopoly enough over the years growing up, and somebody eventually will get upset during a Monopoly session because they're losing, right? They got thrown in jail too many times. They hit Boardwalk and they went bankrupt, and their brothers across the table teasing them and like, you gotta pay me, and then somebody gets pissed. And I have an uncle who's my dad's older brother who is notorious for when he starts losing at Monopoly, he'll go pout in the bathroom and like lock himself in there for 45 minutes, smoke a joint, and come back out and like, all right, I'm ready for another round. But I mean, if he starts losing, he gets upset and like has to walk away because he can't handle losing.
Yeah.
Then going to D&D sessions, I've had very good luck over the years being a part of some very good D&D sessions. But there was one group in particular. I remember it was after I'd had, that's an irrelevant part of the story. I was in my early 20s. I think I was 22, 23 years old. And it was the first time I had ever worked outside of construction before. So I was working at a call center, MCI, I think is what it was called, selling long
Okay.
distance. And there was a group of people who said they liked D&D. So I had my homebrew world, which was the Saga Lucemia world, and I was like, well, cool, let's get together and play D&D. So I went to these people's house, and I'd known them for maybe 3 months at work, right? They weren't like friends, they were work people. And the first couple sessions, like maybe 3 sessions, went pretty good. We're getting the characters going and everything else. And as you know, I use flavor rolls. So I
Sure.
use that D6 liberally to do role play scenarios. Well, there was I think there was 5, maybe 6 people involved in the group, and it was a husband and wife whose house it was being hosted at, and they were the 2 that worked there. And then the third person worked there, and then they had a couple of friends join. The husband was the one who lost his shit. And the reason
Oh.
was because they were fighting hill giants. I'll never forget this. They were fighting hill giants, and he wanted to do this crazy dexterous thing where he like jumped up into a tree and like did the Legolas flip off the tree onto the hill giant's back and stab him in the back with 2 daggers. And I was like, okay. So he made he did the roll. He just barely hit the dex check. And granted, we'd been using my flavor rolls the whole time up until this point to whenever something is right on the money, I always roll a flavor roll to say, well, how much did you succeed? How much did you fail? And I
Sure.
rolled, and it rolled poorly. So for a little bit of flavor, I said, you jump from the tree, you don't manage to land and stick both daggers in his back. You get 1, and then you kind of slide off and then fall. And this guy lost his shit. Like,
Really?
I made the roll. That's bullshit. There's no way I should have fallen off. I made the roll. You saw it. I made the dex check. I should have landed exactly what I wanted to do. Both daggers in the back and killed that hill giant with backstab damage. Like he was not happy with the role play component. Like he's like, I made the roll. This is no. And he legitimately had such a bad reaction that I canceled. And I was like, you know what? Best of luck, guys. We're done here. And I just left the session and I never went back. It was like I took my toys and I went home. But I was like, I do not want to be around people who are going to, be
Flip
that
out.
up in
Yeah.
arms. And that's when I get to the MMORPG component of what I think makes group-based gameplay challenging. It's not the content itself. Maybe it used to be the content 20 years ago. But these days, I feel like even if we're talking mythical raids in World of Warcraft, yes, there is a skill component to clicking things at the right time in the right order and moving to the right place and learning all of that rotation. That
Yeah.
definitely is a skill component, and that is a challenge that adds to the gameplay itself. But once everyone has figured that out, that's no longer an issue. It's
Sure.
everybody knows it and you just do it. The first few times are the challenging component, but once you've overcome that, the biggest challenge I've found is ego
Mm,
and people management. Because
sure.
invariably you get people who are really obsessed with their gear, or you get people who, I think the one I've seen the most frequently over the years is this is the reason why I am the main tank in every guild I do, because there was one time where I was in a guild way back in the day before I started managing my own stuff, and the main tank had a falling out with the guild leader, and he left. And when he left, like half the guild went with him because he was the raid
Oh yeah.
tank.
Oh
And
yeah.
so half the guild was like, well, if we don't have the raid tank, we're gonna have to spend 3 months re-gearing up a new tank. I don't want to spend 3 months doing the content again to gear up someone new who might leave later on. So we're just gonna go with that tank and do what he's gonna do because he's the one whose backbone we were riding on the whole time. And that's not to
Yep.
say that the rest of the guild isn't important when it comes to a raid, but the raid tank or the raid tanks are the most important component because they are the forefront. And so I learned that lesson very early on in my raiding career, that if I was going to run any sort of gaming guild, I had to be the raid tank, because that eliminates that issue right out of the gate. It just says that if other people want to go their own way, That's fine. Other people can have egos and do what they want to do, but the tank position is always covered. And that means we can always make forward progress because you can always find healers, you can always recruit DPS, but the tank position is very, very difficult to lock down.
Yeah.
So the people component, I was very lucky when I was running Stormhaven, the guild I ran for like 7 years prior to doing this gaming community, before I took a break, and that was when I was raiding at the peak. We had 7 years. We only lost 2 people in 7 years. We ran a tight crew of 40 people, and that was it, 40 people. And we were doing EverQuest 2 raids, so you only needed 24 people. So we had rotations of people who would come in and come out, but it was a good group of people who stuck together for quite a long time. Played Vanguard, EverQuest 2, Lord of the Rings Online. The 2 people we lost, one was a 19-year-old kid who had been really cool, and the rest of us were all, in our late 20s at that point, and he was the new kid. He was really cool until we got into raiding, and then once we started raiding, he had gotten promoted to being an officer because he was a nice enough kid for like playing with him for 6 months, and he was doing. And the moment he got promoted to being an officer, he turned into a little dick. Just was like started ordering people around and bossing people around and treating people like crap. But it was like that can't happen. And the worst part about it was myself and the 2 other people who were helping lead the guild at the time, we tried to have a private conversation with him about it, and he didn't want to keep it private. He took it to guild chat, and we just had to boot him from the guild because he was just spamming guild chat with all of this drama. And we just had to boot him. And of course, then there was questions, what's going on, and all this other stuff. And the other time, it was just a person who was mature about it and came to us and said, "Hey, I would rather be doing this other thing instead of what we're doing. So I'm going to go ahead." He was upset about static groups because the way I used to run the guild is very different from the way I run it today. So today we have our static group, but everyone else could do what they want. And the way I used to run the guild was I set up the static groups for everybody in the guild. So if you were logging on to play the game, you had a group that you grouped with, and you didn't group with anybody else. You only grouped with those 6 people. That was it. And everybody grouped with the same people on a nightly basis. We all leveled at the same time, and it was mandatory static groups. There was you didn't get to pick. It was, I'm going to set up groups based on tank, healer, DPS, crowd control, and these are the people you're grouping with. And it worked. But one guy got upset because he wanted to do something else with a different group, and I was like, well, they can't make that work with your schedule because of these reasons. These are the people that match your schedule. I'm sorry, like you can't, because if he wanted to go over another group where the schedule was different, but that would have left like 3 or 4 people out of a group because they weren't going to be able to match the other schedule. And at the end of the day, he was like, "Well, it's not going to work out then because I really want a group over there and I don't want to do this." And I was like, "Look, it is what it is." But the people management component, I don't know if that's been your case as well.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a major factor. And I'll tell you another thing is that, like, group content used to be harder when there wasn't such a prevalence in the MMO world for voice chat, because it was harder to communicate because you had to type. And if you're in the middle of a battle or doing things or what have you, it was hard to type, or it was hard to say it in time. You know what I mean? So, and plus, then you have to wait for the person to actually read what you said. It was just communication used to be a lot harder back when, there's always been some sort of voice chat almost. It didn't take long anyway for it to come around, but it took a while for it to become everybody uses it. You know what I mean? I feel like maybe around the TeamSpeak time was when people just expected you to have a microphone. That really wasn't that long ago.
Maybe 15.
Yeah, maybe 15.
Well, I can remember it was
15 years ago.
2003, 2004. It was all we were using Ventrilo and TeamSpeak, and it was pretty much. I want to say it was like mandatory. I can even remember like by 2002 probably. I remember it kind of being a mandatory thing if you're going to be raiding, because I remember only the first like 2 or 3 years of raiding in EverQuest were we actually using like typing, because it was pretty early on that Ventrilo came
Oh,
on
for
the
rating,
scene.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
No, not
That
for
was
grouping.
that's
Yeah, we didn't use voice chat for groups. I'll tell you when it really became a big deal for us was EverQuest 2 because EverQuest 2 had built-in voice.
built in. Yeah.
So we just used that instead of Ventrilo because we didn't need to have a subscription or anything. And so we used that for groups. We used it for guild chat. We used it for raids. We used it for everything. It was beautiful, and it works to this day. The end game voice chat for EverQuest 2 is quite good. Actually, I shouldn't say to this day because I haven't used it in a very long time, so I can't say if it's actually still good.
To your
Um,
point, though, I think there's something a lot to be said that maybe a lot of us don't really consider in our day-to-day playing with people online in MMOs, which is think of how many people you know that are sore losers.
oh wow, yeah.
It seems like it's most people actually, um, and when you're playing an MMO together, especially as you get into later content, you're going to lose a lot, and everybody's going to make some mistakes, and that is that human component a lot of the times where people start pointing fingers, they get aggravated at other people, they feel like they didn't do anything wrong, somebody else would have just done something else more right, they would have been okay, or all these kind of things, and that probably does stem a lot from people just not being able to take an L.
Man, this ties into the toxicity discussion we had the other day because
Yeah, it
I
does.
feel like a lot of times when people are coming up against something that they consider toxic, it's actually not toxicity. It's the other person, or maybe even the person in question, who doesn't know how to take the L. They don't know how to deal with loss. And I don't know how much of that is just, man, this could turn into a socio-political conversation about, the first place medals and, all that other stuff. But there is
Yeah.
something to be said how games have trained us to constantly be winning
Yeah.
because you're constantly getting rewarded, and then you start doing group-based content, raids, and there's more than one person involved. There's more than 6 people involved. There's 10. Let's say I think the 10 mans are pretty manageable, but let's talk about the 25 mans because we have our own first, theoretically our first 25 man coming up, next Wednesday, and we're going to be attempting our first 25 man. And theoretically, we pray and we hope, and I've ran with most of these people before in the past, and most people are pretty mature, but there's usually at some point there is someone who gets a little upset because they're like, well, I could use that item and I didn't get the item. It was given to someone else. And I'm feeling a little upset because I feel like I deserved it as much as them or maybe more than them. And everyone is eventually going to get their shot at things.
Sure.
But the reality is that, especially, and it doesn't matter what system you use for loot. It
Right.
doesn't matter if it's
Right.
DKP or whatever. We're doing officer assigned because that takes the people thing out of the equation. And if people want to blame anybody, they blame you and I and Maduros.
Yeah.
Because Maduros,
Yeah.
you're somewhere in here, Maduros. You're gonna get blamed too. Um, but there's 3 people you can blame for the loot getting handed out. So at that point, we've eliminated hurt feelings across the board, and we've just said if you have an issue, it's with these 3 people. But some people do, and it's a weird thing to me how upset people can get over gear because
Yeah, and the thing is, here's my biggest problem with gear, right? Is so typically, and I don't know if this is how it's going to be in World of Warcraft or not, but typically when I've raided, we knew the loot table, okay? So we knew what could drop. So people claimed before we even went into the raid dibs on things, right? And if 2 people had conflictions, they both wanted the same piece, cool. You guys are going to have to roll for it if it
yeah.
drops. You're going to have to roll for it. And then who's to blame?
The dice.
Nobody. It was the
Yeah.
roll. The dice. Like, and I do think that helps. Not saying it's a solution because there's gonna be issues sometimes, but I think then it feels more like it is your fault if like you won, you knew you were gonna have to roll against somebody, you roll the dice, you lose. Then you kind of feel like more likely to feel like, oh dang it, I had a bad roll. That was my fault, even though really it was just RNG, right? But anyway, there's still going to be issues. Still going to be, or somebody. Here's what makes me mad though. is when you play by those rules, something really good drops, right? Unexpected good drops, right? And there was a guy who said he wanted. He was the only one, right? Like he's doing this raid specifically hoping this super rare thing drops. That almost never does, right? And then somebody else suddenly has a reason that they need it more than that guy, and it's like, well, hey, this guy took the chance of like probably mine isn't going to drop, but I'm going to come here and give it my all anyway. That it did drop, and he claimed it. It's his. Period. Now we're not going to roll now. You have to call those dibs beforehand. You can't do it after you see the awesome thing, right? And in some games, there isn't a system where the loot all goes to somebody and they divvy it out, so people can ninja loot.
Yeah.
In that situation. Now, that sucks, and I've seen that happen to people before, where it was their dib, the thing dropped, somebody else decided, I'm going to need it, and they lost. And it's like, well, holy shit, this person's been coming here every day for 2 months, wanting that one thing, it finally dropped, this douchebag showed up for the past couple of weeks, got lucky it dropped, and they needed it and got it. You know, that's some screwed up stuff.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I'm a big fan of the master loot system and just officer assigned, because then there's no chance of any hiccups. If there's anything,
and if there is,
it's on me.
Well, it's on the guy, right?
Yeah.
The person holding the loot. Yep.
It's
a thief. There has to be a thief. Who
ninja looted that thing? I think going back to the people management thing, I've told this story a couple times on live streams. We've had a very good run with our gaming community, which was previously the Saga Lucimi gaming community, and now it's the Raven Syndicate, which is part of our Wander Hermits. We've been doing this for 8 years now, so some people have been here for those whole 8 years. Other people have ducked in and out depending on the games we've played, because we've played lots of games: EverQuest 1, EverQuest 2, TLPs, ESO, Star Wars: Old Republic, Lord of the Rings Online. Now we're doing World of Warcraft: Wrath of the Lich King. And in all of that time, there's only been one drama experience that happened, and it was during EverQuest 2 this past holiday, where we had a brand new person, Joe, who everyone knows and loves Joe now, Joe Allen Music. And Joe was a brand new player to EverQuest 2. He had found my channel from my Icewind Dale videos, and he started hanging out with us and joined us for EverQuest 2. He fell in love with the game. He's still playing it periodically, although there's not a lot of people playing with him right now because we're all busy in Wrath. But we were just starting to get into the raids for the Kunark content. We're going to go get after good on Mythical, so we were doing some test raids. In content that was like green, we're 12 levels, 15 levels beyond it. It's not, it's 25-year-old, not 25, but it's, 20-year-old content. It's not challenging. We're doing it with mercenaries half the time. We're doing it with like 15 people. And we wanted to let Joe have a chance to pull and to be like at the forefront of the raid, because we've all done it before. He's never done it. Let the new guy do it. And so he went and did it, and he did a pretty good job, but he had a couple of pulls where he pulled in a noobish way. Who cares? Who cares? He's a brand new player, and it's a learning experience for him, and we're 15 levels beyond the content. It's not like we're going to wipe from it. Well, we had somebody in the guild who took it way too fucking seriously and got really upset and was making comments during raid chat, which is one of the reasons that we decided after that raid, I'm locking down Discord and people aren't allowed to talk outside of the raid leaders because way too many people have opinions on things. And it was bad enough that night, but then the next day I was live streaming. That person was in my group. We were doing content, and he proceeds to start to rant about how Joe's a fucking noob and blah, 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 blah. And all of us in the group chat, because we're in a Discord group, are just kind of sitting here going, is this really happening? And the worst part of it all, Joe was watching the stream. So this guy in my group chat, and I had to literally stop the guy and be like, you can't talk about people like that. This is a 20-year-old game. We're not playing to be at the top. This was 20 years ago to be aggressive like that. He's new. Nobody died. We're all learning. Everybody just needs to take a chill pill and just relax. And he kept pushing it, and I kept having to like talk him down, and eventually he shut up. And then I had to line, send him Discord messages and be like, do not ever do that shit ever again. Ever. I don't care if we're live or not. You do not, but especially when I'm live, but you do not attack another player just because they're new at something.
Right.
Because now Joe, who had previously up to that point had been having the best time, and he took it like a champ, because he took it on the chin and he still kept playing with us. But his joy and his enjoyment of the game and his enjoyment of the guild was decimated by the fact
Oh,
that he
sure.
knew that there was someone in the guild that considered him to be a fucking idiot, and it ruined
Yeah.
it for him. And I was like,
Yeah.
that's the kind of stuff that in my mind, that's what makes group content challenging, is that the interpersonal relationships and the egos that you have to keep in check, which
And
thankfully are very rare, but it still happens.
yeah, and even knowing that there's people always out there like that makes people more hesitant to do group content, especially when they're new, because they know that there's so many asshats out there that will call them out for not knowing every single little detail, exactly where to pull, how many to pull, in what order to pull, and just knowing the dungeon, forward and backwards, and they don't because they're new. How could they? And this is where you end up um, with people who go on YouTube. They want to play a new game so badly that they'll go on YouTube, watch a tutorial for the entire, completely spoil the experience for themselves, just because they don't want to enter that dungeon and not know exactly what to do. Like literally study it like it's a raid, so they can try their best to run as professionally as possible, just so somebody doesn't say something mean and just ruin their good time.
Mm.
And that's sad. That's
It is
freaking
sad.
sad. And it's
It is
common.
sad.
It's super common.
Especially in an older game like World of Warcraft. I know I've been avoiding the
Yeah.
spoilers, but we've had a few people posting, here's how to refresh on Nax, and everything in our Discord, and it's great. And I can avoid it. It's easy for me to avoid it, but at the same time, I'm like, it's always so tempting to like click the video and just go watch it, because I'm like, you know, I don't want to fuck it up for everybody else, but at the same time, I have a right to be the first time person and to see it for the first time and to experience for the first time. And I feel like thankfully most people who are going to be raiding with us understand that, and
Yep.
are not everyone will be. Some people will give it a shot because they like you or they like me and they're following our YouTube channels, and or they're followed from Sparrow's channel. They're here for the multi streams, and so they're willing to give it a shot because of who we are. And they might make it two or three before they're like, you know what? It's not for me. Like I need fast.
I want to clear it.
I want to clear
Yeah.
it. I don't want to be banging my head against that same mob 20 times over 3 different sessions.
Yeah.
But I also think like I feel like it's an unfortunate reality that at some point someone is always going to lose it, and that's the downside to being a guild leader or to doing any set of guild related activities, is putting yourself in the position of knowing that at some point it's going to happen and you have to be able to deal with it. And that's a challenge. I'd say the other things that are challenging from my perspective in terms of what makes group-based content challenging is the logistical stuff that no one thinks about and everyone takes for granted, like making the spreadsheets so that everyone can put their name on a raid roster so that we know how many people are going to show up for raid and what do we have available and what classes we are. And then if no one's showing up, why aren't they showing up, and recruiting around those people, and then organizing and scheduling, and then setting up the Discord and making sure that that runs flawlessly, and then setting up the guild, make sure that I mean, there's logistical nightmares that make it's like a second job. And if you're okay with that, then that's fine. But it is a responsibility component, and that's something that's challenging for people, is that responsibility aspect of it, which again, this can even tie back into tabletop. When we're talking about what makes group-based content challenging, the scheduling issue
Oh
is
yeah.
a challenging component for a lot of tabletop, and we've even suffered from it to some smaller degree with our Sunday night sessions. I feel like we're all committed enough to it that it's never been a big deal. It's usually been health related, which is great. Because I've seen other people. It's never happened to me, thankfully, but I have seen other people whose they try so hard to get a D&D campaign started, and they get 3 or 4 weeks in, and somebody invariably burns out and
Yeah.
decides that they don't want to commit anymore. And when one person burns out, if you're a small enough group, that makes it very difficult to continue with the other. If there's only 3 other people, do the other 3 people still want to continue? Because, well, now my friend is gone, and I really wanted to do it because he did it, and he didn't like it. And do I really want to stay here if he's gone? You know, that scheduling component is another big factor. And this ties back into why I'm such a proponent for the matchmaking systems we talked about last week, because the scheduling becomes less of an issue. So this is an interesting thing that cropped up in guild chat the other day, because I thought I was going to attempt to run a 10-man on Sunday, because like during pre-patch we had like 30 people logging on Sundays, and we knew there was going to be a nostalgia fallout. You know, you're going to have people who fall off. We've definitely seen that, because this past Sunday we only had about 15 people online and not enough people to do the 10-man. Not a big deal. Someone mentioned in guild chat that this is what flex rating fixed. And I went, what is flex rating? Because I don't know what flex rating is. So then I went and researched it. So apparently World of Warcraft retail has this thing called flex rating, where the raid will automatically adjust and scale the difficulty based on the amount of people that you take with it. And I went, holy fuck, that is a brilliant solution to the scheduling issue of
Sure.
maybe someone can't make it this week, or maybe 3 people can't make it this week. No big deal. We, the people who are still here, the 10 of us, the 15 of us, the 17 of us, the 13 of us, the 8 of us, we can still go do the content and have fun, and it will automatically scale the content to us in difficulty. That is brilliant.
Yeah, that is good.
Brilliant. I did not know that was a thing, by the way, everybody, because I'm still new to
I
World of
didn't
Warcraft
either.
retail.
I didn't know that either. I mean, I knew that they had, I knew that they had the ability to scale it to some degree, but I thought it was not that complicated, because I knew they had like the LFR, you know, which was easier than the, you know, queuing up with your static. So, but I did not realize that you could go in different party sizes and it would scale. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. Really cool stuff, because that right there gets rid of the scheduling equation and the scheduling nightmare as well, because well, now it doesn't matter if 2 or 3 people can't make it, whereas in classic it's very much is still, I mean, you might not need 10 people to do a 10-man raid. You could probably do it with 8 if you're all on your toes and you know you're good geared and everything else, you have the right makeup. And a 25-man you could probably do it with, you know, 20 people. I've heard of really good guilds doing a 25-man raid with 10 people, but you know they're completely kitted out and they know the content backwards and forwards, and so they don't, you know, they're so skilled at it because they've ran it 500 times that that repetition has allowed them to supersede any sort of difficulty component that might be tied into requiring 25 people. I don't
Now,
know.
real quick, because it is part of the subject, and this is something I've always argued. I'd like to hear your opinion on it.
Sure.
When people get tired or they've done the rating forever, right? And they love that challenge, okay? But they're waiting for the next content, right? But they still want to play that game. You know what I mean? I always, if the game offered it, I would always say, well, hey, why don't you go do a little bit of PvP? Because you're facing off against real people. They're going to behave, you know, you don't have the same fight more than once. You know what I mean? It's going to be different every time, and you're going to be facing off against different classes and, you know, etc. And that's, if while you're waiting on content, why not just go do that? Because I do believe that there's a very big difference between even, you know, a difficult encounter NPC versus a challenging player,
An unpredictable player.
Yeah, an unpredictable. I always found that's the only reason I like PvP. Now, most of the time, it's not fair, right? That's the thing about PvP. Usually, it's not fair. They're going to jump you in your weakest moment, right? That's the name of the game, and I think that's why most people don't like PvP. And I think that's why there's a big rise in the popularity for arena-based PvP. It's because that's very organized. It's 4 versus 4, 5 versus 5, or whatever. But I like the unpredictability. I think that's part of the fun. Now, I'm not gonna lie. Somebody starts, you know, camping me at my spawn point over and over and over. I'm gonna only take that for so long. I'm gonna log out. I'm not gonna quit playing. It's just I'll be like, that douchebag. But how do you feel about that? Do you agree with that, or do you have a different viewpoint on that?
Now, see, I've traditionally hated PvP, but I've admittedly never done the battleground style PvP that World of
Oh, sure.
Warcraft offers, which is
Okay.
different than the PvP that I have attempted in the past. The PvP I've attempted in the past has been like EverQuest 1, EverQuest 2, open world. It's just a PvP server, and it's no holds barred. As I understand the battlegrounds, it's it's goal based, so
Yeah.
it's like Hutball in Star Wars: The Republic, which I have done a few
Sure.
times. And I didn't mind the goal based PvP because it was your team versus the other team, which is similar to Battle Royale. And I actually, no lie, if I had an actual static group who would play Battle Royale games with me, I would totally be playing like Apex Legends, or
Oh, really?
I would totally do it. I have tried like Call of Duty. I'm not that good. I've tried Apex. I'm not that good, but I could get better. And
Yeah. Yeah.
and because I used to play Halo back in the day, and this makes me
Yeah.
sound old, but like I was really good at Halo back in the day, and I was really good at GoldenEye, But I was very good because
Yeah.
we used to play those games for hundreds of
Religiously.
hours
Yeah.
religiously because there wasn't anything else to do. So there's a part of me that like I've played. I think it was 2 years ago. It was before we moved. It was my two cousins and my uncle. They're the ones I grew up playing Halo and GoldenEye with. They were like, "Hey Tim, do you want to join us and play Call of Duty?" And I was like, "I've never played Call of Duty." Um, got on, downloaded it got Warzone on the PS4 and went to play them. Now I sucked compared to those guys because they've been playing it every day since the game came out, since Warzone came out, and they were just like, we'd go in and we'd do matches, and we would consistently, they would just carry me. Like I would get, you know, one, maybe two kills. They'd be up like 15, 16 kills each one, and we're getting, sixth, eighth, 15th, a couple times got third. Like they got first when they played with their friends, but they could never get first when I was there with them because I fucking
Right.
drug them down. Like I'm the anchor weighing them down. But I really loved the experience of that environment playing with my cousins and my uncle. And just because of scheduling and everything else, I couldn't continue with them. But there's a part of my mind that's always said, if I could get together with like a few people who would want to do that and play like 2 times a week and pick a game that we would play and stream it, I would love to do that. And that's why I come back to, I wonder if I would enjoy the battleground
Yeah,
style
you
of
would.
PvP in this game because it's goal oriented,
Yeah.
like battle royales. And so I
It,
don't feel that it's the
yeah,
same thing as
and it's
open
very
world.
team focused and hilarious. Here's the deal: as long as you're playing with people who all are good spirited, people who don't care, how many times they lose until they get their bearings and everybody's, on the same page. As long as you're, in that group. So like, I don't think it would be a bad idea if every once in a while we don't just run a PvP night on Thursday, right? Just be like, hey guys, we're just gonna run Battlegrounds. Because if you just enjoy group based content when it's fair, it's not always fair. Most of the time, it's fair though. In Battlegrounds, they do a really good job. It's a lot of fun, man. It's just addicting. I think a good example is Sparrow hates PvP, but she loves PvP and WoW. The Battlegrounds, because it really does just feel like another piece of content for the game. It doesn't necessarily feel like it's any different than any of the other content. It's just another really fun thing to do. And once you learn the maps and the rules for the different types of content, it's a lot of fun, dude. And there's some really exciting moments. Like, here's my opinion. The most exciting things in MMOs and PvP are situations like, for example, I'll use WoW since that's what we're talking about. You and a buddy sneak into the enemy's keep. There's people there, real players. You're trying to sneak around them. One of you distracts them. They all start chasing you, and the other one grabs a flag and makes out the other exit, right? You work together. The one guy dies because he gets hunted down by the 4 people in the keep. The other guy gets the flag, though, and makes it back, and you guys get a point. And then you start figuring out all these different strategies. And even when you lose, it's hilarious. Like, something funny is going to happen, So We should do it one time.
I
I have
don't
a feeling that
disagree.
everybody'd have a good time.
I think that that's an interesting proposal to want to go try that maybe one of these Thursday nights.
We'll get spanked a lot, and here's why. I might be wrong, somebody correct me if I am. But I believe in WoW, if you're a full group, then it's going to place you in battlegrounds with other people who are full groups.
And they're way better at it than
yeah,
us.
people, yeah. Typically that means they're pros, they always PvP together. But it wouldn't matter. It really wouldn't matter. You get experience for losing.
I was about to
you know
say,
what I
do
mean?
you still get ranked
Yeah.
for and points to earn towards gear even for losing?
Nowhere near as much as winning, but
Sure.
yes. It doesn't feel like it wasted your time.
That'd be the most important thing.
Unless you're a tryhard. There's tryhards who do feel that way because they want to win every time and they'll be like, oh, I just wasted, I just wasted 10 minutes of my life. But it's not. It's not. It's worth it for how quick some of these matches are. Overall, by the end of the day, you'll be like, dang, I got a lot of experience. It used to compare, I haven't done it in a long time, but it used to compare to running dungeons all day. You run PvP all day, you run dungeons all day, you're going to end up about the same experience.
Interesting. I mean, yeah, I think that that's a good call towards
content.
towards adding a challenge for a group if they are lacking something else.
Yeah. And I think when you're talking PvP, definitely, because there's no other way to do PvP. It has to be with other people. So I think that is definitely a challenge above other things for the same reasons also that we talked about, egos and personalities, but also because they're unpredictable. You're fighting an unpredictable thing.
Is there any people and egos and management and logistics aside, is there any modern game that actually provides, and I don't want to say mythical World of Warcraft. That's a level of, we know it exists. It's an optional thing that you can go do if you're at that, if you wanted to play at the absolute top tier of gameplay. But outside of mythical World of Warcraft, is there any group content in a game that you can think of off the top of your head, a modern game, that is actually challenging enough to be defined as such? Because I've played a lot of MMOs, and I honestly can say that I don't think I have felt challenged. I can't tell you the last time I felt challenged. It's been maybe Vanguard, maybe.
Maybe a few. Like DDO, it's the one that has the I forget the name of that difficulty, but
Insanity or something.
Insanity or something, yeah, and it just spawns randomly when you kill something. It has a very low chance of spawning a Reaper or something. It'll just destroy you and your party. And plus the mob, everything's just harder. I feel like that feels a lot like Mythic rating. You know what I mean? I'm trying to think if there's any others, but I feel like there's not many. Not many companies do it.
I just don't think, and I don't want to make this into a upcoming games and development discussion, but I look at upcoming games that are being developed and games that have just launched, and there are claims made about challenging group-based gameplay, and I look at the gameplay or what's being proposed, and I just don't see anything that's actually challenging, because it's literally just the same old, okay, it's a new acclimation system, or it's a new gear-based system, or it's a mob that's got a new AI that you've not faced before, and you have to learn the tactics. But at the end of the day, I still feel like content is still always going to come down to learning the AI and learning the mechanics of the fight. And once you've done those two things, which doesn't take more than a couple runs, maybe 3 or 4 runs, once you've done that, you've eliminated the challenge, and it's no longer challenging.
Yeah.
I can't think of any game that constantly, which is one of the reasons why, if you look towards the co-op battle royale games, I think that there's that continual challenge, because it's as you mentioned, the PvP component. It's the continual unpredictability of not knowing what the other team's going to do.
And the thing about players is they learn new tactics. You know what I mean? they react differently in different situations. So your one tactic that worked 5 times in a row may not work again on the 6th time, even on a totally different person, right? And so I think that that's kind of the ultimate. Now, I will say that there's a lot of attempts coming down the pipeline to make content that takes some of the core gameplay that we are used to, but just tries to mix it up, like Ashes of Creation with like the node system where it kind of changes the world. So maybe you go to this zone all the time, but if you go here during when the node is switched, then now it's going to be totally different things going on there, right? So it'll be new challenges that so I think there's that. Pantheon's trying to do the disposition system
That's what it
and
is. I said
also
acclamation,
random.
but it's disposition. Yeah.
Yeah, they got acclamation too, but acclamation be more something you would find out about quickly and then you would overcome it. So that would kind of fit into what we were talking about earlier. But the disposition, it could spawn, different mobs. They're going to spawn with random dispositions in many places to where they're going to react differently, which will cause all the other mechanics in the game to come into play when maybe it didn't before. And that's a interesting way to try to do it. I will say this though, and I don't know if there's going to be many people around who remember this, but when Mark Jacobs was making Dark Age of Camelot, he actually was promising a system pretty much identical to the disposition in Dark Age of Camelot. And for anybody that played that game, I guess he was just straight up lying. There was nothing like that in that game at all. Not even close. If you take the NPCs from Dark Age Camelot versus the NPCs in EverQuest, EverQuest is way more complicated. Way more. There's way more things can happen. They can behave way more different kinds of ways. They can do more things to you. EverQuest, you can get charmed by a mob, right? That was not in Dark Age Camelot that I'm aware of, unless there was probably a raid fight of some sort, maybe in Trials of Atlantis. But besides that, like, normal mobs cannot charm you or any of that. That didn't exist.
That's what I was thinking. I think the last game that challenged me was Vanguard years ago. And the reason was there was one simple mechanic to that game that was, to me, was the challenging component. Counterspelling. Because there were certain fights that you would do where if you didn't have a caster in your group who could counterspell at the right time, then you would very quickly find your group being wiped by this massive AoE that would just take you out. Now, was that challenging for the whole group? Yes and no, because it would depend on, did the sorcerer or wizard or fantasist counter on time and actually counter the spell, in which case you're good, or did they not counter and now you have to try to do a recovery in the middle of a fight because 2 of your team members got knocked down. So here's another good example. This actually happened the other day on, I feel like maybe heroic mode in World of Warcraft. I felt somewhat challenged a couple of times because the mechanics change a little bit on some of the fights in heroic mode in Classic here on Wrath of the Lich King. And a good example is that my Death Knight is pretty well geared. I'm raid ready and done heroics and everything else, and I'm where I need to be, right?
Yeah.
And we were doing I can't remember, Azure Nerob or whatever it's called, the spider one.
Right.
And there's that beetle that you fight at the end. And up until the heroic version of that dungeon, I had never paid attention to the mechanics at all because I had never needed to, because the regular normal modes are fairly standard, and I've always been fairly well geared, so I've never really been challenged going through those dungeons. And also we've always had very good geared people with me on my Death Knight. It is a lot different for those people who have ever watched our live streams, which, by the way, we're doing after this. We have a Mortal stream tonight. When Nathan's tanking, because Nathan is not heroic geared like my Death Knight is. But the point I'm making is that that beetle fight, we went in, and I didn't realize that it was doing the pound ability that it does, which is like that AoE that you have to get out of the range of. And I, despite all my gear and despite my 25,000 hit points and all this other stuff, got one-shotted. And it was Styx and I in a group with a couple of pickup people. And one of the guys in the pickup group was like, maybe next time don't stand in the middle of the pound when it goes off. And I was just like, yeah, sorry. I literally said in group chat, I was like, sorry, noob moment. Like, I didn't, I'm not my first time running the heroic version of this, and I just didn't realize that it was going to do that to me. And that has been something I've been pleasantly surprised with World of Warcraft, is that it's not like the heroic modes are super challenging, but they do add a certain level of I need to be careful and I
Yeah.
need to actually pay attention to mechanics. I might actually need to get out of the way of that AoE. I might actually need to do a little bit of crowd control. I might need to pay attention to only pull one group, not three groups. Like it sort of adds not necessarily a level of difficulty, but a level of, slow it down, let's not
Yeah.
raffle
Pay
stomp
more
our keyboards,
attention to
pay more
the stuff.
attention.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which I am
Well,
pleasantly surprised with.
and I'll say this too. I think there's a little bit of a confusement, my opinion here, but that we don't need to be challenged 24/7.
Fuck no. I play
No.
easy mode on every game that I play. God of War, Baldur's Gate. Anytime I play a game for the first time, I play it story mode
I
100% the first time
You should
through.
do too, unless I'll be honest here. Unless I think somebody's gonna walk in when I save it and see that I'm playing
Ah!
on easy, and then I'll be embarrassed because like I've got a son here who plays a lot of video games. So my wife will judge me, or maybe I'm live on a stream and somebody will see a save file that says easy. So if I think that, then I won't, right? Or if I've heard the reputation of the game is too easy, then I'll be like, well, I'm not playing on that. I don't want it to, I want to be bored, But I want to say this: Elden Ring, right? Or a Dark Soul game, doesn't matter. In those games, sure, you can die to regular things, like it's totally possible, but you effed up when that happens. You know what I mean? Like you genuinely like effed up. The challenge in those games is every once in a while, you get to a boss fight. You don't know this fight, therefore it's going to be hard, right? You're going to have to learn it. You're going to get your butt kicked a lot. It's going to humiliate you a few times. You're going to have to learn it and get better at it. And then once you beat it, and I just recently went back and started playing Elden Ring again. And I got to the first boss that absolutely whooped my butt live on stream.
I remember watching that.
35 times, you know what I mean? Before I finally was able to beat him. But that was my first time playing them. But I haven't played the game in months, right? So I thought this was going to happen. I thought it was going to be a repeat. Nope. One-shotted him. Because I remembered. As soon as I saw him doing things, I was like, oh, no. I've already learned my lesson on these things. I know what he's doing. I know what this is. I know when to do this and that. And even though I hadn't played the game in months, I remembered it because it was memorable, because it was hard. But if everything in the game was difficult, well, then, number one, that's way too much mental energy. I'm going to get tired and not want to play the game for more than a few hours.
I was genuinely surprised to hear Dr. Disrespect say that he considers Elden Ring to be the best game he's played all year.
Yeah, yeah.
And
it's good, dude.
I want
to things where, even if you're not having fun when you're playing, here's the weird part about Elden Ring. Sometimes you'll actually be mad, and you're like, I'm not having any fun. This sucks. This is too hard. Give it about a day. You'll be like, dude, that was so much fun. Let me go do it again.
Himbar said something in chat. I want to touch on. Crinkled also said he defaults to normal. When I'm playing a game like Baldur's Gate or those RPG styles, I will usually play those on stream. I'll play them on normal mode because I want there to be a challenge to it. But if I'm just me, and it's just me, and I'm playing offline, like right now I'm playing Cyberpunk offline, recording those sessions, I'm playing that in easy mode. I don't need to do it in hard mode. But I love what Himbar said about Halo. You got to play it through on normal mode, and then you got to go back and play it on Legendary because Halo is one of those games where putting it on Legendary it's an amazing experience, because if you can actually beat it on Legendary, you feel like a fucking god. But again, it's way better, and they don't have the co-op in yet, I don't think, but it's way better when you're doing that with co-op and with friends and having that group component, because it's way cooler playing Halo with friends. Like, as cool as Halo is, like I loved Halo Infinite. Actually, to be honest with you, I played it when it came out. I would totally go play Halo Infinite again.
It's good. I think it's really good.
That was a fun storyline.
I didn't even do the story. I just did the multiplayer. I did a little. I started it and I was like, I just think I'm just out of the Halo feels anymore. But I had a ton of fun with the multiplayer.
Well, let's
living crap out of it.
Is there any other? What's up, Chris? I'll be done in a few minutes.
Online co-op on November 8th.
Let's go ahead and wrap up, Nathan, because it's 7. We
Okay.
got to prep for our multi-stream, and Chris just informed me that I need to help her with the cats because it's time for cat food and stuff. Is there any other stuff we can think about that contributes to group-based gameplay being challenging? Other than I think the takeaway for both of us here is that the most challenging component of group-based gameplay is other people, not the games themselves. I think are we both in agreement on that? I feel like we are.
I'm gonna say this too. I think that the way that raids are made, even in modern games today, is a fun way to do it. I complain a lot about modern games, but I don't complain about the raiding because I do think it's fun. Because I think having to learn to fight, teach other people to fight, and then when you can do it and everybody knows it, and then you can like one-shot it, that feels really good. You know what I mean? That feels really good, and I think it's very rewarding just to know that you got through that when it was relevant, and that you learned it, and that you can do that. And then you can help other people get through it. And I think that's one thing I think that modern games have been doing right for a long time, is rating. And I do think that the only reason rating is hard is because of those things. But I like it. I'm not saying I think they should change that. I really think that's just a core video game addiction, right? Hard until you figure it out. Easy then. You know? I like that. I think that's what got me into video games to begin with.
That's a fair assessment. And from that point, dealing with peoples and the logistics and everything else just adds a little bit of extra flavor to it.
It does.
Well, everybody who hung out with us tonight, I appreciate your time. Every Thursday at 6 p.m. Central, we do this show for about an hour. We're talking about various things related to RPGs, mmorpgs, tabletop games, and beyond. And then most Thursday nights, as soon as we wrap up with this, we go and we do our multi-stream in World of Warcraft Classic with myself, Nathan, Sparrow, Maduros, and Introdor, my brother. So, for those of you who want to continue the World of Warcraft journey with us, tune into the live streams. We'll all be individually going live over the next 15 to 30 minutes as we get assembled. And every Thursday night, you can catch us here on Twitch. You can also catch us here on Twitch every Sunday night at 8 p.m. Central as we play through the Weave in the Void campaign, which is that world map behind you, which is the homebrew campaign from the Wandering Hermits, who are myself, my brother, and my wife. And then Nathan, Bounty Code, Sparrow, and Skinny participate in those. We're up to session, I think this week's going to be session 5, as we're going through that campaign. So come tune in live, check that out. You can also go to patreon.com/Wandering Hermits if you want to support, or if you want to support us directly here on Twitch, which hopefully you do because it's a great way to support Nathan, myself, Bounty, Sparrow, Skinny, my brother, my wife, because we have a Twitch partnership here. Just do a sub here on Twitch or throw bits at the channel, whatever you want to do. It's all great ways to support the channel and help us as we continue to grow across all the various networks. So from here, get ready because Nathan and I will be going live on YouTube. Sparrow will be going live on Twitch. Maduros doesn't stream, my brother doesn't stream, but you'll catch us all live here in the next little bit playing World of Warcraft together. I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that, Nathan.
Nope, that's perfect.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. We will catch you next week. Same time, same place. Until then, peace.